Sources of energy for muscle contraction. The muscles are created for mechanical movement, and mechanical movement needs energy. The form of energy that the muscle cells use is ATP. But unfortunately, the ATP that's stored inside muscle cells is not sufficient for contraction and relaxation. First, let's discuss why we need ATP inside the muscle cells. We all know that ATP is needed for actin-myosin interaction. This is for contraction. And ATP is also needed for relaxation. During contraction, the cytosol will be flooded with calcium. Calcium intracellular concentration will increase, and we do not want this to happen all the time. So after contraction, we want calcium that's in the cytosol to be pumped again into the sarcoplasmic reticulum and out of the cell. This pumping of calcium into the sarcoplasmic reticulum and out of the cell needs energy in the form of ATP. And also, to maintain the ionic environment of the cell and of the extracellular environment, we need the sodium-potassium pump. It's a pump. It needs ATP. So ATP is needed for contraction, actin-myosin interaction. It's needed for relaxation, for the pumping of calcium into the sarcoplasmic reticulum and out of the cells. And it's also needed for the maintenance of the ionic environment through the sodium-potassium pump. But unfortunately, the amount of ATP that's stored in the muscle cell is not sufficient for prolonged contraction. We only have 4 millimolar of ATP inside the muscle cells, only 4 millimolar. This 4 millimolar, they are sufficient for muscle contraction for only 1 to 2 seconds. So what will the muscle cell do after these 1 to 2 seconds? It has to regenerate the ATP. So we'll now talk about the ways by which the muscle can regenerate the ATP. How can this ATP will be split into ADP and phosphate. In order to regenerate ADP, we have to rephosphorylate ADP and to regenerate ATP. And there are 3 mechanisms by which ATP can be regenerated. First is the creatine phosphate. Creatine phosphate is a creatine molecule that's bound to phosphate. There is a high energy bond between creatine and phosphate. If we want to phosphorylate ADP, we have to break the bond between creatine and phosphate and then use the energy that is released from breaking this bond to making a bond between ADP and phosphate and then to regenerate ATP. But the amount of creatine phosphate that's present inside the muscle cell is only 5 times the amount of ATP. So ATP is sufficient for 1 to 2 seconds. So the creatine phosphate will be sufficient for 5 to 10 seconds only. So what will the muscle cell do after 10 seconds? It has to depend on other mechanisms. The second mechanism used by the muscle cell to regenerate ATP is glycolysis. We all know that glycogen is stored in the liver cells and in the skeletal muscle cells. It's stored in the liver cells for the sake of the whole body, to provide glucose for the brain, for the heart, and everywhere else in the body. Because we know that the liver cells, the hepatocytes, they have glucose 6-phosphatase that can remove the phosphate from the glucose 6-phosphate and then release glucose into the blood, and then through the blood the glucose can go everywhere. But in skeletal muscle cells, the gene for glucose 6-phosphatase is silenced, so there is no glucose 6-phosphatase. So glucose 6-phosphate that results from glycogenolysis will remain. From glycogenolysis, we will have glucose 6-phosphate. This glucose 6-phosphate will be used for glycolysis. The glycolysis process has 2 advantages. First, it is a fast process. If we compare glycolysis to oxidative phosphorylation needs a very long time, but glycolysis is very fast and it occurs quickly. So we have glycogen. This glycogen will give us glucose 6-phosphate. This glucose 6-phosphate will be used by glycolysis to generate energy very quickly, and but it will generate energy very quickly, but this will lead to accumulation of lactic acid, and the lactic acid can lead to muscle fatigue. The relationship between lactic acid and muscle fatigue is still controversial, but we will stick to what's mentioned in our material, that lactic acid is correlated with muscle fatigue, and it can interfere with the functions of enzymes inside the cells, and you know the whole story. Now, this is the second mechanism. The first mechanism is creatine phosphate, the second mechanism is glycolysis, and the third mechanism is oxidative phosphorylation. If the muscle wants to contract for 1 second, ATP is enough. If it wants to contract for 10 seconds, creatine phosphate is enough. If it wants to contract for 1, 2, 3 seconds, glycolysis is enough. But if it wants to contract for 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours, glycolysis, glycogen stores within the muscle cell, they cannot be sufficient for prolonged muscle contraction. So we have to depend on oxidative phosphorylation. Although oxidative phosphorylation is a process that takes a very long time, but it is very effective. Now, oxidative phosphorylation is the process by which pyruvic acid and any intermediates that come from the metabolism of proteins, the metabolism of fats, fatty acids, and any other molecule, it can enter the oxidative phosphorylation process, and for each intermediate coming into the oxidative phosphorylation, we can generate 34 ATP. So if you want to compare between glycolysis and oxidative phosphorylation, glycolysis is very quick, oxidative phosphorylation is slow, but oxidative phosphorylation is more efficient. One glucose molecule in glycolysis can generate the maximum of 4 ATP, but one glucose molecule in oxidative phosphorylation or any other intermediate from other metabolic pathways can provide the muscle cell with 34 ATP molecules. So oxidative phosphorylation is the main energy source for contraction of the muscle, for prolonged contraction. If the muscle wants to contract for 3, 4, 5 hours, oxidative phosphorylation is the main source of energy. We've ended the discussion of sources of energy for muscle contraction. We will revise it quickly. The muscle depends on ATP. After 2 seconds, ATP will not be present, so creatine phosphate will take the role of providing the muscle cell with its needed energy, and then after 10 seconds creatine phosphate will not be sufficient, so glycolysis will kick in for 1 to 2, 3, 10 minutes. After that, glycogen stores will not be sufficient for a prolonged muscle contraction, so oxidative phosphorylation will kick in, and it will start providing us with the needed amount of ATP for muscle contraction. ATP is needed for muscle contraction and needed for muscle relaxation, for pumping of calcium, and needed for the maintenance of the ionic environment inside and outside the cells. And this is the end.